Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about the law of electrostatics. Matter is made up of atoms, and atoms have three basic particles that make them up. In the nucleus of the atom, that's this little center part right here, we have protons and neutrons. Protons are massive, that's relative to electrons. So keeping in mind atoms are so unbelievably extremely small that all of these particles are very, very, very small. But relative to one another, protons and neutrons are relatively massive. Protons are positive, and obviously they're located in the nucleus or in the center. Neutrons are also massive. They're neutral, they have no charge, and they're located in the nucleus. And finally, electrons. Electrons fly around the outside of the atom. They're not massive. An electron, the mass of an electron, is about 1/2000th the mass of a proton or a neutron. So they're about 2,000 times smaller, and they're negatively charged. So since matter has these two kinds of particles within it, positive and negative, then matter itself can become positive or negative. If we have matter with more electrons than protons, more electrons than protons. Since the electrons are negative and the protons are positive, that matter becomes negative. If we have matter with more protons than electrons, since the protons are positive and the electrons are negative, we have more of the positive, so this matter becomes positive. Most matter is neutral, or at least pretty close to neutral. The number of protons in most matter is pretty close to the number of electrons, and so the two cancel each other out. All the positives and all the negatives cancel each other out, and the overall matter becomes neutral. We only get a charge if we have more of one of those guys, and it has to be a significant amount more for us to see that it becomes a significant charge. If we think about the protons, neutrons, and electrons, we have our, again, protons and neutrons in the middle and the electrons in the outside. Two factors come together to make it so that electrons are what is exchanged, lost, or gained by materials. First of all, they're not really massive. Since they're light, that means they're a little bit easier to take or give to an atom. Secondly, they're outside the nucleus. So since they're on the outside, again, it makes it easier for them to be lost or gained. What that means then is that objects can either have extra electrons or they can have less electrons than they usually have. And we use the terms excess to mean extra and deficit to mean not as many as they usually have. And that's how atoms become positive or negative. So if I have an object, plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus, plus, minus, as it currently stands, this atom or this material would be neutral. I have the same number of pluses as I have minuses. To become negative, it would get extra electrons or have an excess of electrons. So what that would mean is that this is what it was in the first place, and I'd add a bunch of electrons there. So here I had 5 pluses and 5 minuses, so they're equal. So this object would be neutral. Here I have the same 5 pluses. Again, protons don't change. They're in the middle and they're heavy, so they don't get lost or gained by atoms. Instead, electrons get lost or gained because they're light and on the outside. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 electrons, leaving me with a charge of -4. Alternatively, to become positive, again, a material does not get extra protons. The number of protons remains constant because the protons are large and in the nucleus. So to get positive, what an object does is it loses its electrons. So here where I had 5, I'll say I lost a couple and now I only have 3. Now I have 5 positive and 3 negative, and so my overall charge is +2. So when matter gets a charge, it gains or loses electrons. It never changes the number of protons it has. Protons are big in the middle. They don't like to change. They're really hard to get out of there. They only really change in nuclear reactions. Alternatively, electrons, who are light and on the outside, can be lost or gained both by physical or chemical means. And so we can get positives or negatives by either getting extra electrons or having a deficit of electrons. The law of electrostatics states that unlike charges attract and like charges repel. So what that means is here my positive and negative materials would attract each other. But if I had 2 positives, they'd repel. Or if I had 2 negatives, they'd repel or push each other away. Neutral objects, I think that should just have 1 L. Repel. Sorry. Neutral objects are attracted to both positive objects and negative objects. We'll talk about why that is in a future video. So, atoms are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons and electrons have charge. That can lead to the overall material becoming charged if they're not equal to each other, but if there's extra electrons or not as many electrons as usual. And that can cause those charges to attract when we have a positive and a negative, when the charges are different or unlike, or for them to repel when the charges are like, so they push each other away from each other. Neutral objects are attracted to charged objects, and again, we'll talk about that when we talk about charging by induction.